Just want to start with a very wise and very knowledgeable and experienced panel that we have put in place. We have uh, Jayant Rastogi, who is not related to me, but and he leads Magic Bus. He has been the CEO of Magic Bus for quite a few years now, and he will be sharing his experience. We have Srikanth, who leads, and Srikanth is our keynote speaker, so he will be sharing his experience of how strategic planning plays an important role for an organization, and how does it play a part in building a resilient organization. We have Antara from Civis. Antara? Yes. So, again, sorry for being unprepared, but Civis is a very unique organization. It supports non-profits on how to focus on advocacy and policy influence. So they play a supportive role for other non-profits, helping, providing technical assistance, and it's a very unique model. And hence, we felt that their experience will be very useful. And then, last but not the least, we have Sonal from Protsahan. So, Protsahan, as you all may know, is a rights based organization. Do we still call organizations rights based? uh, but sorry, another thing I was told was no political jokes, but couldn't resist. So yes, some organizations still work on citizen rights and ensuring that citizens can ask and demand for their rights, and Protsan is one of those organizations. Without much ado, I'll just give a brief introduction of the session structure. It's a complicated structure, so please bear with me. It's a combination of a masterclass and a panel discussion. We were initially thinking about Brisbane giving all the gyan, and we realized it'll be boring, it'll be impractical sometimes. So we really need to have people who have gone through the process to share their experience. So apart from this 5 minute monologue, I want to keep it as much towards the panel, but I'll have to clear some slides, some 12 slides over the 2 hours. We will bring some exercises, some questions for you to ponder about your own organizations in the session as well. Uh, that said, and I'll request Srikanth to take us through Janagra's journey on how Janagra found strategic planning to be a great tool for building and scaling their organization.
Thanks, Shashank. Good morning, everybody. My name is Srikanth. I work with Janagraha. We are a Bangalore-based NGO working on systems change in cities. We worked on a strategy exercise. In some ways, the first fairly significant substantive strategy exercise in a fairly oldish organization of then it was, I think, 20 years or 21 years. And it happened totally by chance. It was not conscious, and I'm thankful for a very chance conversation with Preeta, who's a senior Britspan partner. And I'll give you a bit of a very brief context of in what stage of the organization we took up the strategy exercise, and then I'll delve into the lessons that may be a little more useful. So we were in a period of fairly rapid growth in terms of external opportunities. So we work very closely with governments and communities, and as India is urbanizing and many governments are struggling to figure out how to fix our cities, they become more and more open to working with external actors, and so it was with us. And obviously, as highly passionate development sector organizations, you grab opportunities with both hands, and we kept doing that for a long period of time. And in some ways, that was creating a lot of stress in the organization on several counts, in terms of funding, in terms of bandwidth, in terms of staffing, and so on. And that was around the time that we had this conversation, and Preeta kind of floated this thought of whether you will find a strategic exercise useful, and I was quite skeptical to begin with, frankly. And we always prided ourselves as an organization that knew what we were doing, that that had deep subject matter expertise. So the feeling was, what is Britspan as a generalist management consulting firm going to come and tell me when they don't know anything about the area of work that I do? And however, through iterative conversations, I did end up signing up with Britspan, and I'm pleased to report back that I'm a fairly satisfied client and customer and practitioner of strategy. Uh, Obviously, I'm one anecdote. Each of you should take this up in your own context using your own judgment. But I'll share a few of the lessons. So, and I must say that in that period of growth, while a lot of good things were happening in terms of getting very talented people to come and work with us, getting a lot of high stakes government engagements going, which will help us influence policy, scale work, and so on. I was a bit lost. I was a bit lost on how I can sustain this growth and how do I deal with this growth? How do I deal with these opportunities? What is the frame? How do I make judgments? How do I know that I'm making the right decisions and so on? So I plunged into it, and I must say that there was a fair bit of opposition within the organization itself, right? And because in the development sector, though we do have a fair share of private sector converts, there is a healthy skepticism of consultants, of external consultants. So there was some convincing that had to be done, and a fair bit of alignment that had to happen within the organization. But at the end of it, I must say that all of us, and our head of strategy is also here. I have to excuse myself after this, Krishnan. You should raise your hands in case somebody wants a masterclass on strategy. I would highly recommend Krishnan as well, in addition to others. I would say all of us have to think very seriously about strategy. And the reason is not because we know anything less about our own sectors, but it's because in the development sector, we deal with a lot of complexity and uncertainty, far greater, I would say, than what markets or governments face. Because markets and governments are principles themselves. As development sector organizations, we are catalysts, we are facilitators, we are influencers, we are persuaders, right? And in a lot of cases, you're trying to change mindsets, you're trying to change systems, you're trying to change behaviors, but you don't have direct agency over it. And therefore, the world in which we operate many times is actually more complex, is more uncertain, and therefore you need a strategic framework to deal with that uncertainty and that complexity. It has nothing to do with our own subject matter expertise in our area of work. It's a lot more to do with a frame through which you make choices and you make decisions with respect to opportunities that come your way, and with respect to organization development. How should you think about building your own organization? So I would urge all of you to think very seriously about strategy. We hired our head of strategy post this exercise as an outcome of this. We didn't have one before that. The second I would say is, one thing that I realized is, and this took me a bit of time, is that in the development sector, perhaps strategy is not the bigger picture, it's the smaller picture. So I always mistook our long-term theory of change, the 10, 15-year, 20-year theory of change, as our strategy. I always assumed that I actually know the 10, 15, 20-year game. So for example, with respect to our cities, one of our agendas is to strengthen municipalities as local self-governments. One of our agendas is to engender greater voice and agency for our citizens through formal platforms for citizen participation. That's an agenda that we knew. That's an agenda that we are clear about. So we know what to do, and we have a reasonable sense of how to do it and the frame. But if you ask me, did you know how to measure impact? Did you know that you had to measure impact? Did you know that there is a certain way in which the funding ecosystem is developing? Did you know that you had to think about your own organization structure, span of control, etc. in a particular way? I thought I knew, given that I did come from the private sector, but obviously I was not spending much time on it. All the time used to go in external opportunities, in really delivering impact. And this was costing the organization. This was slowing down our institution building efforts. And therefore, for my own framing of strategy for the development sector, it's the important small picture of how do you strengthen your organization. And ultimately, all of us recognize that we are running a marathon. In some ways, we are running a marathon of sprints. So you don't just need strength and agility and speed, but you also need stamina to last that marathon. And that is no mean task, and that involves very serious organization building efforts, so that you're able to create a robust civil society organization that can perhaps outlast your lifetime, because many of our agendas are fairly long term. So strategy is the smaller picture of how do you build the organization. You may know the 10, 15-year journey, but what is going to be the 3 to 5-year journey? How do you think about the organization structure? How do you create annual plans? How do you create a 3-year strategy, work backwards to create an annual plan? So those kind of things which sometimes you tend to think are trivial, are not so important, etc. You realize as the organization is rapidly growing, become very, very fundamental, become very important, help you to take on more opportunities, help you to grow your own impact. The third thing that I want to say is we didn't do it for knowledge, we didn't do it for innovation. We did it for clarity. There were too many things running in our minds, right? We were already in existence for 20 years. In some ways, you could say we knew too much. We had too many pieces of information. We had too many data points. We had too many anecdotes, which was not giving us clarity on how to make choices. And we were beginning to therefore do too many things and spreading ourselves thin. So one of the principal objectives of the strategy exercise for me personally was to solve for clarity. So that would mean two things. One is to ask and answer questions which already were on our minds, but also to remove blind spots. There were questions that our external consultant would come and ask us, which may be lying deep buried within you, or which you may have never thought of. And therefore, it's important to remove the blind spots. So we actually solved for clarity. We didn't solve for knowledge or innovation. We were not looking for them to come and tell us about our sector. And the good thing is, many of these consultants actually recognize that. They don't see themselves as sector specialists. And we also did it for an outside-in view. There is a school of thought that says you only need a facilitator to do your organization strategy. I actually am not a big believer in that, because I believe what you will get is a sum of the parts. What you will get is a reaffirmation of what each of your colleagues and you have already been saying. Whereas when you get somebody from outside who's dealt with a wide variety of organizations, who's dealt with a wide variety of areas, sectors, who doesn't work just with non-profits but also works with funders, and therefore is able to give a very balanced perspective, is able to give a unbiased view, doesn't just give a development sector view, and therefore is in some ways is untainted, if I can say that ironically, by idealism. They are very real and pragmatic. And this was very important to basically help us come out of an idealistic and ideological, bubble, and face the world the way it is. And I'm saying this particularly with respect to funding, right? So in the frame that we were left with as part of the strategy, one important dimension was about funding potential for the work. We never thought of it that way. Not that we didn't understand the challenges or the significance or complexity of funding, but we never thought that has to be a boundary condition for us. That was pure idealism. That was purely believing that if you do good work, you will get money, which is not real, right? And which may be okay for you to think about 10, 15 years, but it's not okay for you to think about it like that in a 3 to 5 year time frame. So we did it for market intelligence and perspectives. However, one thing that we learned to do over a period of time is also to set expectations clearly. Essentially, not to expect an external consultant to come and give you some breathtakingly new perspective. Don't expect the consultant to come and tell you something, some penetrating insight which you never thought about. That was never the expectation, right? So we had very modest expectations of saying, maybe they will validate what you already know. Maybe there are one or two assumptions that you had which they will dispel. They may tweak, they may nudge some of the things that you did slightly. And there are 2 or 3 areas where they may challenge you. They will challenge you fairly, sharply. And most importantly, they will offer you new ways of thinking. And that, I will say, is one of the most important takeaways for us, which is the frame of thinking. How should you make decisions? How should you make choices when you have limited resources? So that was an important thing for us. And I'll tell you, for us, our experience was it was a combination of validation. It was a combination of dispelling some assumptions. It was a combination of tweaking, nudging, 2-3 areas of sharp challenge, and all of these 5, in fact. As I'm reflecting now, it was a combination of all of these 5 that we benefited from, and not one big thing that came out of the strategy exercise, right? In many cases, it is possible when they leave for you to think, what value did they really add? But I remember our co-founder saying, most of the best consultants leave you with that feeling, right? At the end of it, when they leave you with something, you'll be like, but I already knew this, right? But the 5 things that are not on the table, which you actually set aside, the programs that you stopped doing, right? And where you said no, those are also important value adds from them. The and therefore the way to think about the ROI of this, and I must say, some of the consultants obviously are very expensive, far beyond our means, and we wouldn't have taken it up ourselves if we didn't have specific funding for this kind of an effort. But the ROI on it, we felt, despite it being a fairly big tab, is completely worth it. Because while the one-time cost is fairly high, folks like us don't undertake strategy exercises every now and then, right? And the frames don't change ever so often. So therefore, in some ways, you amortize that cost over say 5 to 7 years, because that frame stays with you for 3 to 5 years at least. Even if you redo a strategy after that, you don't redo the frame. You already know the frame, so you're in a much better place as an organization to deal with the strategy. So I would think that when you think about the ROI, don't think about the one-time cost. Amortize that cost over a period of time, and also think through the fact that the cost that you've invested in this is going to help you spend the rest of your money better. So, so that ROI is also significantly higher. It's not just the cost that you. So, if you're a 5 crore organization, you're spending, say, 30 lakhs. I don't know the fees now, so I'm just taking a random number. If you're saying, say, 20, 30 lakhs on your strategy exercise, it's going to help you invest the 5 crores in a much better way and grow the 5 crores further. So think of the ROI slightly more expansively rather than narrowly. The next thing is that we learned is not to underestimate the value of a shared vocabulary for internal alignment. Frankly, the fact of the matter is, before this exercise, we never took the pains to go through the details of how do you align our internal teams with a single vocabulary about your strategy, about your results framework document, annual. In fact, we didn't even have a vocabulary like that, right? A lot of things that we say, like through line to impact, results framework document, the annual plan, the operating model, these are all phrases we actually took away from the strategy exercise. And the utility of this is not that you already didn't know. We have a lot of smart people working in the organization, but each one comes with their own baggage. Each one comes with their own perspective from a different setting. It's useful for somebody from outside to come and give you one model that all of you sign up for and say, this works for all of us. It comes from a really credible organization. It's been battle tested in several contexts. So it works for us. So let's go with that. So I wouldn't undervalue that either. But of course, you have to choose your partner very wisely. You have to choose your consultant very wisely. If it were not for Preeta and Anant, I wouldn't have gone for Britsman. The fact of the matter is, I went with people who I fully trusted. I went with people who I felt were genuine well-wishers of the cause and the organization. I didn't go with a brand. I didn't go on a gut feel. Because the most important thing in a non-profit is, while we are called the non-profit sector, the diversity within the sector is so wide and vast that context matters the most, right? Cookie cutter or boilerplate models many times will not work, and the stakes are too high for you as an individual organization. That is what I was most worried about, saying, if this fails, then I can't afford, time-wise or cost-wise, yet another strategy exercise. I don't have a choice but to make this work. And therefore, the odds are quite high. And so I would say choose the person. I just have one more bit. So I would say choose the partner fairly carefully. But the last thing I would say is, the consultant is only an advisor. The external partner is an external partner. Each of us will have to take charge to make this succeed. These exercises take a fairly reasonable period of time. We took a fairly long period of time, right? We took about 6 months because we did the strategy and the operating model. But we have to take charge and make it succeed. There is a very good chance that the strategy exercise will drift. And that drift is not the external advisors or consultants' fault. It's up to us to take charge, to course correct, to constantly think of the risks underlying this, and to ensure that what you are left with at the end of the strategy exercise is something that you and your team fully understand and can implement. It's not just something very romantic, looks very insightful, looks very fancy, but it's something that each of us as individuals running the development sector organization and our leaders fully understands, fully aligns, and has the time and the capability to implement. If you meet these conditions, I think it's totally worth it. I think I'm reminded of Sun Tzu saying that my co-founder used to remind us of, that I don't know that I'm getting the exact wordings right, that strategy without tactics is a long route to success, but tactics without strategy is a sure path to failure. So we need to, all of us in the development sector are bigger picture thinkers. And you need the details for us to be able to implement it. Thank you. I have to excuse myself now. Sorry, Shashank, panelists. All the best. Thank you.
Thanks, Srikanth. And just in the interest of time, what I was thinking was I will spend less time on the slides in the masterclass aspect and more time with the panel. I just want to have a show of hands from the audience whether that's a decision that you are all okay with. Yes, thank you. So if I rush through the slides, it's your fault. How does this? Okay. So quickly, I'll set some brief of what's. Sorry, just give me a minute. So otherwise, this was the 2 hour session where like we were planning to go into slides, then come back to the panel, go into the slides, come back to the panel. What will still happen is we will use some of the slides to maybe summarize what the panel is saying, but we'll focus on more practical aspects. And one thing I would want to say, Srikanth has left. He said sometimes the facilitator may not play that role, which is as effectively. I don't think that may be true all the time. When you're doing strategic planning, it is very contextual. Sometimes your organization may just need one of your board members to play that role. But you need to understand the context you are in. Sometimes you don't need the outside in picture, or sometimes you can get that outside in picture yourself. So you may not need the consultant. So it's not a session about selling strategy consulting. It's about importance of strategic planning for an organization. And so quickly, this is what strategy is about. It is about having a clear, focused identification of your goals with a high level plan to achieve it. There is the high level, the long term 10, 15-year mission that Srikanth talked about. But then that mission needs to be translated into something which is easily understood, which is probably quantifiable as well, or like very clearly identifiable. Who and what are you going to serve? And then a theory of change, which is about how are you going to achieve it? What are the most important activities that you will undertake? It is at this stage, for example, the equity considerations need to be built in, because otherwise what happens is we have created a program, we have started doing it, and then we realize that there's a segment of the community which is getting left behind, and these are the people who are probably more marginalized in the first place. So there is this element that needs to be considered, and that translates into the operating model of the organization. Srikanth talked about they did a strategy plus operating model. What will be the structure? Who will be accountable for what? What kind of capabilities you require? What kind of processes and systems do you require? Do you need any kind of IT enablement? Do you need some kind of revamp of the process? Do you like fundraising is an important component when you're talking about this is what you want to achieve. What kind of funding would you require to achieve it? And again, how will you measure whether you're moving in the right direction? And if not, what is going wrong and what kind of corrective action can be taken? Quickly, again, this is something that Srikanth has talked about. It helps in better focus use of resources and time. The founder or the leadership bandwidth is the most important resource that I would urge all of you to consider. Like we talk about human resources, we talk about funding, but we never talk about the fact that the leadership bandwidth, the mental bandwidth is limited and the most limited resource. Creates an internal alignment. Again, Srikanth talked about it, and it allows you to communicate to the external stakeholder what are you trying to achieve and how are you going to achieve those. So quickly, I'm just quickly going through this slide. 6 steps for strategic planning. You don't need a consultant. These are things that you can do. There are also templates available on Ritspan site. You can do that. But start with clearly identifying why are you doing a strategic planning exercise. What are the most important questions? You need to identify who are the people you will consult internally and externally. Are there funders who really understand the topic that you're working on? Are there other NGOs that you can talk to? Then clarifying who will you work for, what impact you want to achieve, where will you work. That's the clarifying strategy. Setting strategic priorities in terms of how will you do it. Then comes the whole part of estimation of resources. And if you will see, there are backward arrows that are going in. So it's not a linear process. You may have to, like, you may arrive at a strategic plan and then realize, okay, this requires a lot more money that we can raise, or this requires capability that will require 1.5 years to build. Then you may have to revise it. And finally, planning to implement means breaking it down further, knowing what are the risks, what are the kind of measurement metrics you will track, and going forward on that. With that, so I'll go back to the panel, and like what I'll do is probably I'll just start, Antara, with you, then Jayant, and then Sonal. On, like, you all have done this in your organization. You have undertaken strategic planning. So if you could give some context of why did you undertake that exercise, what were the triggers, what were the questions on your mind that you wanted to get answered through this exercise? And Antara, we can start with you.
Is this, yes, you can hear me. All right. Thank you so much, Shashank, and really keen to hear from others' inputs as well today. My name is Antaraa, and I lead an organization called Civis. I'll just set a little bit of context about what we do so that it helps clarify the journey piece of what we're talking about today. Civis is an organization that works on people's participation in lawmaking. The idea fundamentally is that laws that are made for us should be made with us. And at Civis, we try and build tech tools as well as processes, capacity building resources to be able to allow for governments and citizens to speak more closely to one another through the entire lawmaking process. Now, something work like this, of course, happens through many standing committees. It's happened in the past through many different kinds of research institutions and organizations, and typically happens behind closed doors. At Civis, the big question that we were trying to solve for is that how do we get the lived experience of the stakeholder to be that drives the policy? Right from implementation gaps, how do we solve for that at the policy design stage rather than having something get implemented before some of these critical issues come up? The reason that I bring this up is because Shashank asked a very interesting question about why strategy. I think as a fairly young organization, one of the key things that we realized is that we were treading in waters which were somewhat unknown. We were trying to work in a domain which perhaps was explored only in certain contexts, and we were trying to broaden that for a larger number of people. That called for a lot of understanding internally on our part about what are our, like Srikanth said, what are our guardrails and what are the areas in which we tread more versus less. As an example, laws come out from about everything from ghee grading, so the quality of graininess in your ghee, to let's say, for example, certain kinds of different wildlife parks that need to be preserved and how one should go about that process. So as an organization, we found ourselves spreading across everything because we were passionate and we were keen and we were enthused by the entire process of lawmaking. And one of the key takeaways for us from a strategic planning initiative was to not just zero in on thematic focus, but also zero in on who we engage, when, and how. I'll pause at that because we have a lot more ground to cover in the session, but this is just a brief inkling on how strategy was relevant to us and why we did it when we did it.
My first question is, how many of you know about Magic Bus? You can just raise the hands. Okay, everybody knows it. Okay, so I'll keep it short in that case, okay? So, very brief introduction. See, we are probably one of the largest NGOs in the country today. We are the largest on the education life skills space. We have 30 lakh odd adolescents who are part of a program this year. Next year will be 80 lakhs, so growing phenomenally. And on the livelihood, we are 2.5 lakhs with 60% girls, and we work only with marginalized communities. So again, the largest on the livelihood, not-for-profits space. So two domains that we work on. Again, growing phenomenally. But I'll just kind of go back to the time when I joined Magic Bus. This was 2016. So been 8 years now. We had all the problems of a growing organization, which did not have too many standardized processes. no uniformity in terms of decision making, etc., etc. So I'll dive into first, people, which is my favorite. So on our people, our score was minus 35, employee net promoter score, which meant none of our employees were recommending us as a place to work. They were not, probably they were not aligned. Uh, then I moved to programs. If you look at the programs, we saw that, our programs were, many of the programs were just not happening. It was all self-reporting. In fact, RCT, which is the gold standard, which is the most important program, after 1.5 years, and we put in our best resources over there. When I went there for a surprise visit, I realized that there's no session which had ever happened. The school didn't even know about Magic Bus. And on top of that, our fundraising or our finances were, we were running a loss. And as an NGO, you can't run a loss. I'm sure you know that. And we didn't have money to pay the next month's salaries. And combined with that, our funders were not very happy, and some of them were threatening to leave us. So that was the state of affairs. And at that point in time, what is it that you decide that you want to prioritize on, right? Is it people? Is it fundraising? Is it your finances? Is it the program? So I think that's where strategy actually comes into account, because you can't be attending to everything at the same time. And that's where I decided that we'll go for the operations first. We have to be true to our core. The program that we live for, we need to really strengthen that. So we got technology at the ground level, and there was a lot of resistance to do that. And for a CEO, a new CEO who's joining, an organization, it's very, you don't want to be called operational CEO, right? Nobody likes that. Everybody wants to be strategic, right? We want to be like Shashank, like Bridgespan, right? Consultants are much higher pecking order. So, but at the peril of that, I decided this is what strategy required, and I need to now dive into, because if you really want to save the organization, you have to look at the program. You have to stand true to what you're for, and we really focus on our programs. We got technology at the ground level to see that what we were doing, we were actually really doing it, and it was a roller coaster ride. It was really, really difficult. So I think strategy is very contextual. It depends on what are the pain areas, what is it that you want to solve, and if I say today that if looking back today, if I get into operations, I think it'll be operational. But today, I think today Magic Bus is a very different organization. We've grown almost we've grown 4 times in the last 5 years. We took some time to kind of basically get into survival, then consolidation phase, and now the growth phase that we are in. So we took some time, and today my challenges are very, very different from what they were at that point in time. Today our challenges is about thought leadership. How do you build the ecosystem? How do you kind of align your finances in terms of your growth ambition? We are growing almost on the outreach side, we've grown almost 10x. On the financial side, on the fundraising side, we've grown phenomenally. We've also created a corpus for ourselves. So the question is, what is it that you can really look at this point in time? So, and I'll talk about the biggest challenge that we have is obviously, our ambitions are really, really big. We're talking about, female labor force participation, a $30 trillion economy, 2047. How do we get more and more females into the job? How do we see that they don't drop off at adolescent where the maximum leakage is there? So those are some of the challenges which we are trying to kind of, look at today. From an organizational standpoint, the biggest challenge that we have is about people. We are hiring almost 200 to 250 people every month, and there's a dearth of talent. So that's I think one of the problems. Also, how do you ensure that your processes are in line with the way you are growing, so that they don't create a bottleneck tomorrow? So that's been the journey. And around stakeholder management, obviously, when I got into initially, I had to convince my board that, I cannot be strategic at this point in time. I need to get into operations. And that is what the strategy is as of now. So you need to get that buy-in. You need to retain your existing funders, telling them, yes, we've goofed up, but we will become better. Our intent, show them the intent. So broadly, that's the journey we've been on, and it's been a fantastic journey for me personally. A lot of learning. I've learned, and I'm still a learner. I'm obviously far more junior to each one of you in terms of my journey in the sector today. Just 8 years. I'm sure many of you would be far much more than that. And I hope I continue to learn.
Thanks, thanks a lot, Jayant, and thanks Antara as well. And it's very interesting, like two very, very diverse reasons for taking up strategic planning. And Sonal, if you could share what has been your experience. But before that, what I would implore all of you to think is in your context, your own organization's context. Like Srikant talked about one reason why they undertook strategic planning. Andhra talked about another reason. Like everything is so exciting. I want to do everything. And Jen talked about something very different, which is like, okay, this is an organization which is, if I may use that word, in crisis. How do I use strategy as a lever to ensure that consolidation can happen? So like very different challenges. Each one of you will have a very unique context. So at this juncture, what I would ask all of you to do is start thinking of your own organization from the perspective of, if you, what are the problems or what are the issues or what are the opportunities that you would want to prioritize. And with that, going back to you, Sonal, and learning about how was it for you, what were the triggers for you.
So, very quick context what Protsahan does. We rebuild lives of child abuse survivors in India. That's the simplest way in which we can explain our work. So, yes, it's a lot of rights based. Yes, rights based organizations do exist, should exist. Strategy के मायने, I think non-profits या NGOs, let's just say NGOs, are very apologetic about even something as branding, which is a part of strategy, right? Non-profits are very apologetic about um, decoding or understanding the concept of scale. Scaling an organization is not systems change. एक चीज अगर हम सीख के जा सकते हैं, scaling, as orgasmic as it may sound for an organization, that is not going to solve the problem per se, whatever silo of the problem you may pick, right? So for us, it may be crimes against children or abuse of children in XYZ, child marriage, child labor, child sexual abuse, begging, incest, XYZ things that we deal with. उसमें अब strategy कैसे लाएं? Is it important? Is it not for your organization? I think the first primal question, if it's important, yes it is. Otherwise, it's akin to having, आप पूरा दिन फुटबॉल फील्ड में मैच खेल कर आ रहे हैं, बहुत थक गए हैं, पर गोल मारा कि नहीं मारा नहीं पता, कितने प्लेयर थे डिफेंस में या कहाँ प्लेयर कहाँ खड़े थे नहीं पता, नेक्स्ट टाइम मैच होगा क्या करना है नहीं पता, बट मैच खेल कर आ रहे हो, बहुत थक गए, और जो नया वर्ड है सेक्टर में, बर्नआउट सबका हो गया है ना, कंपैशन फटीक सबको आ गया, विकेरियस ट्रॉमा सबको हो गया. वी ऑल्सो थ्रो अराउंड वर्ड्स लाइक ट्रॉमा इन द सेक्टर दीज डेज एज इफ इट्स सम इंस्टाग्रामी. It's a privilege to work in the sector. Let's start there, right? अगर आप इस सेक्टर में काम नहीं कर सकते हैं, let's make a choice. Let's not try and stick. That's also part of strategy. When you do people and HR, these are the questions we were asking ourselves as a non-profit, which is a rights-based organization. So a lot of our work, the end game is government adoption, right? The end game for a lot of the little pieces that we're doing, for example, making a policy for trafficking survivors, को एक option मिले to enter main workforce. Yeah, we'll sit with the Delhi government for a year and a half too, and work what policy draft can come up to change the perspective, the future of everyone who's in prostitution in Delhi but wants an option out of it. Can the sarkar give some sort of a leeway out of it? So we'll sit with the government stakeholders and draft policy, right? And by the nature of saying rights-based organizations, we are not supposed to be a 100 CR organization. You know, it's not FOMO. It's a joy of missing out only, I'll say. JOMO. There is no प्रोत्साहन में हमें कभी नहीं लगा है कि today, yes, we have about 50 plus people, 50 full-time people, plus a lot of consultants and other staff. Let's say 60, 65 people. But the idea has never been to be a big organization. So one of our first strategic exercises, Nina is sitting in the room here today. Strategy का मतलब कुछ बहुत बड़ा नहीं होता है. When the conversation started, मुझे डर था क्योंकि हम consultants को इतना एक what's the word, Jayant, you used? highest pecking order पे बिठा देते हैं. That's so beautifully said, that we think that they will come and save us. It's like, you know, the elite today saying that, oh, it's good that the British came and oppressed us because train का system तो चलो खड़ा कर गए इंडिया में. Indians को तो क्या ही पता है, हम, you know, we are the hungry people, poor people. No, we are not. We have sense, we have sensibilities. मनरेगा यहाँ से निकल कर आया. We know what a consultant can come, yes, or consultant, or I think organization, or even your own leadership should be able to do that in your organization. जहाँ पे strategy framework या tool से निकल के नहीं आता है. A lot of people would want data, and every tool is free only, यार. Come on. Facebook was free when it started. जब आप राइट्स बेस्ड से शुरू करते हो ना, आप सही सवाल पूछने की जुर्रत करते हो. दे आर नॉट द मोस्ट पॉपुलर क्वेश्चंस इन स्ट्रैटेजी. Srikanth has made a very important point in the beginning. Strategy will tell you what not to do. That is as important as what you wish to do when you're making the strategy for your organization. So for Protsahan or Protsahan like organizations that want to set up collectives, that want to set up hyper local change, that don't want to grow, that want to stay lean, our strategy may be very, very, very different from a 100 CR plus organization. I was I was speaking with Nudge people a couple of months back, and we had a beautiful conversation. And the conversation was revolving around this thing where, you know, this is a 100 CR organization, this is a 200 CR, this is a 500 CR organization. Globally, these are the biggest NGOs that exist in the world. And वहाँ पे जो लोग बाकी NGOs बैठे हैं, as I'm assuming some of them may be in this room too, they may be a 50 lakh, 75 lakh, 1 crore का organization, right? Are we saying if you are big, you're the best? Then that's a problem. Let that problem be the first question you're asking yourselves when you're drafting strategy, and more we'll delve.
The last thing, Sonal, that you said reminded me of a oldish filmy dialogue, which was "उसके बड़े होने से मैं छोटा नहीं हो जाता." So just because someone is bigger in scale doesn't necessarily means that they are like bigger in everything. So
Everybody cannot be an Ambani.
and at this point, I just want to again ask you, like, there is this what we call sometimes siloed thinking that can happen, and it's important to bring different voices when you're doing a strategic planning exercise. So, like, were there other stakeholders that you consulted, whether it was funders, whether it were board members, whether it were mentors who may be mentoring or on the board of different NGOs, or like anyone who could provide a different perspective? So maybe, Jen, we'll start in this order. And then.
Yeah, so see, I mentioned that, you know, see, the first thing when you get into an organization and you want to kind of, you know, take a different path, you need to get your stakeholders on both. And stakeholders are within the organization and outside the organization. So first thing is, in any board meeting, if any of you are in the senior leadership positions, the boards typically want to see you as strategic. And you don't want as a CEO to be seen as an operational CEO because you're like, this is the death knell, right? So you also want to be strategic. But then that was a very difficult choice, because if I had chosen strategy at that point in time, I'm sure, you know, we would not have been where we are today. So I chose the operational route, and that is also part of the strategy, like I said. So I had to really convince the board members, because the board members did not understand what were the issues the organization faces. They did at a very high level, but at the ground level, they really didn't understand that, right? So you had to buy it when you. I told them that, see, I'm a doctor over here. I know patient ko cancer hai, कि उसको सिर दर्द है, and I know which medicine to give. And trust me. If you don't trust me, then please get somebody else. So they had no choice. So they had to trust me. So, so it starts with that. But then I think the bigger battle is within the organization. Because see, in any organization, if you see, you know, you'll have this typical funda, and I'm sure, you know, you'll all realize. See, there are 10-15% of the people who are the leaders, who want change, who are aligned to the organization vision, who are happy to kind of, you know, do new things. So they are the leaders. Then there are another 70, 75 or 80% who are the followers. They are good people, because you can't have all leaders also. They are again good people. The balance 5-10% people are the ones who are like, you know, नहीं ये भी नहीं हो सकता, data से क्या होता है, measurement से क्या होता है, ये तो फालतू में corporates आया, इसको कुछ पता नहीं है, ये sector. So there are all those kind of. Those are the people that you need to deal with. You need to counsel them, move into some role which they like. And that is why I feel that, one of the most important things when you're doing any strategy or you're changing at a very, very high speed, you're transforming the organization, you have to have a very strong communication cascade. And that's something which we built. I don't think we are where I want us to be, but you have to build a communication cascade which is telling people what is the reason you're changing, why are you changing, what benefits do you get. And I'll give you some specific examples which you'll relate to. So first is top down. The second is also bottoms up. Understanding what are the challenges when you're rolling out some new technology or some new strategy. What are the pains that the teams are going through and solving them proactively. And I'll give you one example. So I told you that, I went for a RCT project just on the outskirts of Mumbai. And for 1.5 years, the program was running. And I was told, बच्चों की attendance 85% है because I wanted minimum 85% attendance. I said session regularity होनी चाहिए, बोलते session regularity हो रही है. But जब वहाँ गए तो स्कूल को पता नहीं था मैजिक बस क्या है भाई. So obviously it's a state of shock. So I decided that we have to have technology at the ground level where we have to see whether the sessions are actually happening. So पैसे उस समय हमारे पास थे नहीं, तो हमने बहुत सिंपल सा एक वो रुका था GPS डेट एंड टाइम स्टैम्प के साथ. हम जो सेशन है वहाँ पे बच्चों की फोटो बिफोर एंड आफ्टर द सेशन ले लेंगे. Obviously keeping data privacy and all that, it will go into a central server वगैरह वगैरह करके. So when I rolled that technology, when we built it and we rolled it out, so first reaction from some of the people who were there was, "Don't you trust us?" अब बताइए as a new CEO what you want. You also, I'm saying, whatever said and then you want to be liked by your people, right? They need to like you. That is only when the trust comes in. So what do you say? So then you take a step back, think, भाई क्या इनको क्या बोले यार, बात तो, it's not about trust, it's about doing the work properly. So then I thought about it. I said, see, we have children, we trust, but we have oversight, and it is a duty to have that oversight, right? And most of the people who work for Magic Bus at the ground level, they're the first time earners in their families. The first time, they're from the community. We have to show them the right ethos, the right culture, the right discipline. If we don't do that, we're not doing our job. So I said, yes, this is important, and this is oversight, and this is also building, depth into the program. And our employee net promoter score -35, which meant that none of them were recommending Magic Bus. That within a period of very short period, once they started seeing the effectiveness of the program, that moved to +20. Today, we are one of the best organizations to work for, Great Places certified, right? So that's been the.
Sorry, I'm just interjecting, but would also love to learn from Antaraa, you and Sonal, who were the other stakeholders that you interacted with and got involved in the strategic planning exercise.
Thanks, Shashank. And Jayant, thank you so much. I think it's great to hear the journey from so up close as well. It's in terms of external stakeholders, essentially what we did was we broke our entire planning document down into smaller pieces, and those pieces were what we did fairly in-depth reviews with the stakeholders that were concerned with that particular vertical or that particular area of our work. So for example, and sometimes it went in with a very frank conversation to say that Civis is at this stage, we're looking at strategic planning and we want your input. But in other times, we actually had to play a little bit of chupan chupai in terms of having these conversations in the guise of much bigger, broader visioning of the space collectively. And I think it's really important to do that also because you're building a strategic plan equally for your organization as you are for the vision that you want to see after your organization is no longer around. And the custodians of that vision sometimes don't reside within your team, but they reside externally. So we would break it down into smaller pieces. We would do interviews. We would ask people for feedback. We're in the business of feedback, so we take a lot of it also. In addition to that, what we would do is we would ensure that we had a closed loop. So anytime that an idea or something that came up actually circled back into our strategic planning, then we would go back to them and say, actually, you helped us with this, and this is how we're planning to implement it. So very small example here because essentially our team also is very small. So there is our ability to kind of come together on these things is a little bit more agile at this stage of our growth. But externally, this is how we went about it in terms of breaking it into pieces and building champions externally.
I'll start off. हमने सबसे बड़ी गलती क्या करी when we were doing strategy exercise. This was the second 5-year strategy exercise that we were doing. So we had grown. We were growing to be a little more bigger organization, if we say, from 10, 12, 15 people to about 50 odd people. तो राइट्स बेस्ड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में जो गलती हम लोग अक्सर कर जाते हैं, एंड आई थिंक इट्स इम्पॉर्टेंट फॉर अस टू ऑल्सो एडमिट इट. एंड मैजिक बस इज फिनोमिनल बिकॉज फ्रॉम मैथ्यूज टाइम टू नाउ जयंत, आई थिंक दे आर सो ओपन अबाउट टॉकिंग अबाउट what we didn't do right. And I think that vulnerability is so incredibly important, because a lot of organizations, they may feel that people who are sitting here have figured it all perfectly, brilliantly well in strategy. No, it's an iterative process that takes easily 4, 5, 6, 10 years. And uske baad pehli learnings samajh aane lagti hain, right? So in the second 5-year strategy exercise, the biggest mistake that we did, so our social workers are the backbone, the very foundation stone of the organization, right? These are the people who rescue kids from points of abuse and then make them go on the healing journeys. So there's a lot of different complex work that kind of revolves around, right? And strategy, let's also understand that it's not for our funder, it's for our team first. Pretty much a lot of things that Jayant also said, na? Your team has to be on board with what you're doing. उसमें सबसे पहले आई वुड से हमें जो लगा, and that the reason why I say it was a mistake, I'll also explain that, is we got all our social workers together. Nina is testimony to that. We got all our social workers, together to sit and do strategy, right? Now, we thought we were being democratic and we being all building consensus, and the wisdom of course resides बच्चे का rescue कैसे करना है, उसको street से school तक कैसे लेके जाना है, and so on and so forth. That wisdom resides in the person who's done it out of 14 odd years in the organization. These guys have been with us for 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, right? So let इनसे पूछते हैं पहले. And oh my God, what a mess I made. I did, right? जो इंसान, for the lack of a better metaphor, सिपाही है, लड़ रहा है सुबह से रात, आप उसको कह रहे हो नहीं, आप कॉकपिट में बैठ के आप बताइए कि चाणक्य नीति कैसे होगी. इज दैट इवन फेयर? By no means does it mean that they don't have the intellect to do it. But sometimes, taking again a thread from Jayant, right? Sometimes that innovators, the early adopters to change, then so I classify them as the supers, the steadies, and the sulkies. Okay, I'm a little more ruthless. Jayant is very kind. So the supers, they will onboard, they will question you and all of that, but once they are onboarded, they will take it and own the entire, whether it's strategy, whether it's a part of whatever strategic exercise it is. The steadies, they will not question around much. If they see things are working, they're happy to kind of and it's very important. Again, like he said, it's very important to have the steadies in your team, because like the bureaucracy sometimes वो होना बहुत ज़रूरी है, बिकॉज वही लोग रह जाते हैं, ऊपर नीचे सब आगे पीछे चलता आता जाता रहता है, राइट? एंड द सल्कीज, इट्स ओके फॉर द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन टू ऑल्सो लेट देम गो. उसमें रूथलेस नहीं होना यार, प्यार मोहब्बत से लेट देम गो. But if they're derailing your strategic plan and the intent, and वो नए नए शब्द आजकल आ गए हैं, layering हो रहा है, change management हो रहा है, and I'm thinking in a 60 people organization, what is change management? In a 5,000 people, okay, I understand. So I think sometimes we also, in the sector, in the name of being too democratic, too consensus built, sometimes things have to be informed. At some level, काम तो करना है ना. Our first I think accountability rests with, I hate the word beneficiaries, our first accountability rests with the communities that जिनके साथ हम काम कर रहे हैं, बच्चा हो, औरतें हो, young people, whatever it is, right? It cannot, of course we need to build a culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, strategy eats execution for breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything. But we have to be very, very mindful of how much of सब एक साथ, there's this thing that we always say at Protsan, we can't all sit together, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Sometimes decisions have to be taken. Sometimes it will be, this is what we are planning to do, this is how it is, what do you think? But हर बार अगर आप strategy में पंचायत लगाएंगे, you will never be able to figure out. And this is a mistake we did. and we learned from it. By no means does it mean it'll be top down and autocratic, no. But sometimes tough decisions have to be taken, and they have to be taken in time so that the work on the ground doesn't suffer. And whatever organizational strategy or the vision that you are building for your team or your work or your mission to grow, that takes precedence over some emotions here and there when strategy exercise would happen. Because 10% people in any organization would take anything absolutely emotionally. Treat it as math. You know, you can't be based, your strategy cannot be based on the sulkies. It has to be based on the supers and the steadies, because the mission will be taken up by them.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sonal. So I'll quickly recap what we heard. So basically, these were the two first steps that we talked about: knowing why you're doing strategy and knowing who do you consult, who do you involve, who do you take inputs from, and who do you inform. So having that clarity is important when you're doing strategy. Uh, Going to the next. Okay, this is better. Old path. Okay. So gesture recognition has started in this auditorium now. And so the next part of the strategy, the next step is about knowing what impact are you striving for? Where would you work and for whom are you working? So basically, clearly identifying these become important part of strategy, because if you don't have that clarity, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So it's important for you to clearly identify and align within the organization of what is the goal that the organization will strive for. So this is again going back to the previous point. This is where the identification of stakeholders becomes important. What both Jayant and Sonal were talking about, what will inspire, what will motivate the 80-90% of people needs to be kept in mind when you're talking about the targets or the end objective that you're looking at. And sorry, there was another slide in between about the how. Yes. Uh, so then comes this whole aspect of it's fine to define, and one thing I missed on the how, or the intended impact, is you need to make it more tangible, you need to make it clear, you cannot keep it very vague. Because let's say if it is about, if I just say I want to improve the educational matrix of India, then Jayant's understanding of what needs to be done and what does that really mean will be very different from my understanding. And hence we may be at loggerheads when it comes to actually doing something. But if Jayant, as Jayant pointed out, he has a very clear mission of improving female labor participation in India, and they will have a number associated with it as well, uh, to uh, like in a way fuel the economic growth of India and the Viksit Bharat. They will do this, and this is what they are going to do: female labor participation, and also like clear definition of where, with which communities, what kind of participation. That will become important, that will give the clarity. Then comes how will you do it. Again, one of the challenge that happens when we talk about our own organizations, and as organizations grow, Antara, what you pointed out, like everything is exciting, everything is amazing, and we want to do everything. But sometimes one big parameter you need to take up is, do you have the resources to do it? Is it really contributing to the intended impact that you have aligned on? So that's the how part that you need to consider, and which may require some hard decisions as well. You may have to look at your existing programs, your existing interventions, see how do they align with your revised intended impact, and maybe take a hard relook and cut down some of those programs if required, or like let someone else do it. So so that's the other part of the how. And yeah, that's that. There was this, sorry, next slide now. So I had talked about earlier that as we are having this discussion, please keep thinking about what's the reason for you undertaking a strategic planning exercise. I'll add to that thinking by saying, as we move forward in this session, please start thinking about what will your intended impact look like. So, who are the people that you're going to serve? To what end? What is the impact that you want to achieve for them? And where will you work to achieve those impacts? So start thinking in that direction as well. And what I'll do is, probably for the next 10 minutes, just open it back to the audience to ask any question, if that's fine with all of you. Yes, Aarti.
What is the importance of the community being involved in the strategic planning exercise? What agency does the community itself have?
Tough question, I'll always pass over.
Hi, Aarti. I'm so glad that this question came up in this room. वो बहुत ज़रूरी है और मतलब it is so for example at प्रोत्साहन we do these things called slum पंचायत जो कि हर हफ्ता 10 दिन में you get the mothers and the fathers of our girls or the children who are survivors उनके साथ बैठ के हम बात करेंगे and then they may not necessarily fit a tool or a managementy exercise of things but that's the power, right? जब हम बोलते हैं पूरा strategy has to be democratized in a manner that it makes sense because that the white woman syndrome that the Indian NGO sector has also white woman white man syndrome that the sector has imbibed that हम अफ्रीका के जंगल में जाके सब बदल के हम ही change करके आएंगे is a very problematic space to begin with. And hence I gave the example of the British coming and saying, oh, we've at least set up the, and the Indians totally believing it, that, oh, if not for them, who would have set up our train system or the railways, right? So I think वो तो हाँ या ना में है ही नहीं वो तो करना ही है वो तो ज़रूरी होना ही चाहिए the larger question is कितने percentage लोग वो patience रखते हैं वो understanding रखते हैं कि वो हो and जो strategy exercise अगर बन भी जाए तो then you go back to the communities and say this is what we wish to do in the next 3 to 4 5-ish years and then community and the stakeholders can be like anyone not just the direct communities it could be the young people that you work with or the the lawyers or the lawmakers it's hard but in this world of quick fixes we don't have time so everything is on a deadline सबको नवंबर में क्रांति लानी होती है फिर मार्च 31 से पहले क्रांति लानी होती है तो समय नहीं रहता है but if it's a either or yes it is the most important.
I think just to add to what Sonal already very nicely put together, it's a reflection of the community. I feel like in many ways, if you don't have the community input, as Sonal very rightly said, we're building castles in the air and we can feel very good about having solved for a particular challenge, but your strategy has to be a reflection of the needs. It has to be a reflection of your organization, has to be a reflection of the needs and what can be solved in that particular point of time. So in many ways, just echoing Sonal's point there, that it's perhaps the fundamental foundation of strategy.
I don't know. I completely agree. आपको अगर समस्या ही नहीं पता है तो आप उसको सॉल्व कैसे करेंगे? So the question is you have to be, and I tell my teams कि आप जितना टाइम बाहर बिताएंगे, जितना कम्युनिटी के साथ जहाँ प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व कर रहे हैं, तो you have to understand the problem at the grassroots level to solve it, right? तो उसमें कम्युनिटी का एंगेजमेंट बहुत ज़रूरी है. और अब जैसे on the livelihood side, we have employers. Now they're providing safe spaces for women. A lot of them are SMEs, small and medium. So you have to work with the community of employers. And then you have also, community, then you have government stakeholders, which is also in a way an ecosystem for us. So you have to work with each one of them, understanding what their problems are.
Sorry, I'll just add a follow-on question to this. So there is this element of consulting the community and talking to the community to ensure that you are identifying the needs and you are identifying what is the priority for the community. But do you also consult the community on how will you go about solving it? Or because there can be a philosophical issues that can, or for whom will you solve it, or whom will you prioritize?
That's a very easy answer, Shashank. क्योंकि उस क्वेश्चन में अगर आप अपना एज अ नॉन प्रॉफिट फाउंडर CEO whatever it's worth our tags that we may carry, that's another conversation, maybe we'll delve in the second part of it, that फाउंडर से CEO बनने की जर्नी एक अलग कैन ऑफ वॉर्म्स है इन स्ट्रैटेजी. बट कि जो हम कम्युनिटीज़ से पूछ रहे हैं, या पॉइंट इज़ to understand our role as players in the system, for the lack of a better way to put it. हम कुछ करने नहीं जा रहे हैं. हम let me put it this way. Let's try and understand our work, or as our roles, instead of doers of this work, as enablers of this work. Then even better questions to understanding scale, growth, all of those, pieces will come forth. We are enablers. So for example, if I'm working with children or young girls, have we enabled them enough to now solve problems in their community? So अगर हमने उनको government linkages, one of the key part of our work is when you're working with the survivor, rescue, care and linkages में, post the rescue, वो काला कपड़ा पहना के मीडिया आने वाला rescue नहीं, very silent, transitional, counseling based rescue for the family, and then the continuum of care piece, and then the government linkages piece. And post that entire process is being, after that is done, the girl is equipped enough to go hold community linkage camps for more women and more children and more migrant people in her community, to figure out कि इनको ई-श्रम कार्ड बनाना है, इनको राशन कार्ड बनाना है, इनको पानी की दिक्कत है. Then we don't get into it, because that's for her to solve. She's a young person who has unlocked her agency, or whatever this fancy new term of unlocking agency should mean. Right? The whole premise is that we are not the doers. The day we put ourselves or understand apni auqat as NGOs, as enablers, and then taking a step back, is when we would have begun to unpack this question well.
Sorry.
I'll just give a different perspective to
Yes.
this. So, see, the scale that we work at, and again, I completely agree to Sonal. See, you can be a small organization doing something really, really big, or you could be a big organization scale. So, I think, वो अपनी जगह है. But when you work at the scale that we work, and so the short answer to, I think Shashank's question is, yes, you have to involve the community. हम क्या करते हैं, हम सबसे पहले कम्युनिटी में जाते हैं, या जहाँ पे प्रॉब्लम है ग्राउंड रूट जाके समझते हैं क्या है. उसके बाद हम उनके साथ बैठ के एक सोल्यूशन, उनको इन्वॉल्व करते हैं सोल्यूशन में. फिर हम उसको एक पायलट, वी कॉल इट इंक्यूबेशन प्रोजेक्ट्स, हम उसको उसकी तरह रन करते हैं. बिकॉज वी कैन टेक इट टू ऑल आवर प्रोग्राम्स, बिकॉज दे रियली ह्यूज, राइट. यू विल it'll kind of, it will bring down the quality. तो हम उसको इंक्यूबेशन प्रोजेक्ट की तरह करते हैं, और उसके बाद जब वो सक्सेसफुल होता है, उसको फिर हम लार्ज स्केल पे लेके जाते हैं. I'll give you a really fantastic example. जब कोविड हुआ, तो सडनली क्या हुआ कि अराउंड 40% हमारा काफ़ी उस समय फंडिंग CSR से होता था. 40% ऑफ द मनी वेंट्स टू प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स केयर, राइट, एंड राइटली सो. एंड यू हैव अ रनिंग कॉस्ट ऑफ द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, यू हैव टू रन द ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. आप क्या करिए? तो अब ये था कि यार या तो आप ले ऑफ्स करिए. हमने कहा हम ले ऑफ नहीं करेंगे उसमें किसी को भी, वी विल वर्क बिकॉज दिस इज वन फैमिली, एंड वी टुक दैट डिसीजन. बट हमने क्या किया था, हमने बिफोर कोविड वी डन अ इंक्यूबेशन प्रोजेक्ट वेयर वी वर्क विद गर्ल्स इन मार्जिनलाइज गर्ल्स इन अ रूरल सेमी अर्बन काइंड ऑफ अ सेटिंग इन रूरल औरंगाबाद, where we had actually created a job exchange where employers, skilling partners, and the participants or the beneficiaries were all on the same platform, and we could put them into jobs, and in good numbers at a very small unit economic cost. जब कोविड हुआ तो all our livelihood centers are physical centers. We couldn't do that. So we immediately change our content curriculum to be delivered online. And we did a survey. We found that 70% of our participants or beneficiaries had smartphones. So when people were losing jobs, we could actually, get them back into jobs and kind of, roll out our programs. So again, these incubation projects, working with the community, doing things, it does help. And that's something which has completely changed Magic Bus. The growth that last 5 years that we got a 4x growth is also because, of the work people started noticing us. So I think that the opportunity was in the threat.
Any other question from the audience? Sorry, I'm just going with one there, and yeah, right now, but please go on.
One question to Sonal. You mentioned that when it comes to scale, you're idea was not to be a big organization from the beginning. So I just want to understand like why was it not done like that? Because from my understanding, it's that if I am to build an organization, I want it to be like at a large scale, say 100 crores, that can have a wider impact.
So for us at Protsahan, it was very important that scaling the idea should come pehle than scaling the organization. Have we not grown from a small little 18-30 lakhs initiative to a 6.5, 8 being next year 8-10 crore type ka organization? Yes, there will be some organic growth in the, and it's taken us 14.5 years in the process. So I'm not going to say that, we are still at 18, 20, 50 lakhs. No. Um, but most non-profits in the country are. The second piece, like the first, let me elaborate on the first one. When we said scaling the organization, did it necessarily mean कि अब मैं दिल्ली के सारे स्कूलों में काम करूंगी, फिर झारखंड के स्कूलों में जाऊंगी, या वो तो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट का काम है ना. NGOs का काम कभी मॉन्स्ट्रस ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस बनना था ही नहीं. आई एम नॉट सेइंग कि सही या गलत के पैमाने से दूर रूमी विल मीट यू देयर, but there has to be an understanding, for example, in our work, right? Survivors of abuse, childcare institutions, the entire child protection mechanism of things, CWCs, juvenile justice boards. It's a very different way of or system in which we operate. हमें कभी नहीं था कि हमें आज 5 सेंटर्स हैं तो कल 25 सेंटर्स हर स्टेट में खोलने हैं. वो हमारा मकसद कभी था ही नहीं. क्या हम CWCs के लोगों को इतना सशक्त बना सकते हैं ट्रेनिंग्स के थ्रू, कोर्ट ऑर्डर राइटिंग के थ्रू, CCIs में इंटरवेंशंस के थ्रू, कला और आर्ट्स बेस्ड कला के माध्यम से बहुत काम करते हैं हम. कैन वी scaling the organization, I'm not saying is good or bad, I'm saying it's a very different monster than changing the system. Systems change itself. A lot of it's become a very rabid conversation that everybody wants to do systems change by getting into 5 states but only working with 200 children, but 5 states. Who are we trying to fool? Funders are intelligent people. They will see through this. And I think the minute you say scaling the idea, then today I'm even trying to experiment with volunteering. Aarti is sitting here, so go take her brain space on that. But can volunteering be one of the reasons, how one of the systems change pieces where the system accountability is again a prerequisite to systems change? तो हम क्या करेंगे? For example, एक survivor है या एक बच्चे को एक्सेस नहीं मिल रहा है, विक्टिम कॉम्पनसेशन नहीं मिल रहा है पॉक्सो के बाद, सेक्सुअल अब्यूज़ हुआ है उस बच्चे के साथ और उसको सरकार विक्टिम कॉम्पनसेशन नहीं दे रही है, बिकॉज सेक्सुअल अब्यूज़ अगेंस्ट अ चाइल्ड मीन्स दैट इट्स अ क्राइम अगेंस्ट द स्टेट, नॉट जस्ट अगेंस्ट द चाइल्ड, राइट? सो द स्टेट इंटरवीन्स. क्या आप स्टेट का वो स्कीम या बेनिफिट अनलॉक करके आपने बच्चे को प्रोवाइड कर दिया, अगर वो 20-25-50 हज़ार और कोविड के टाइम जो पेरेंट्स बच्चों के लूज हो रहे, दे वर डाइंग, सो द चिल्ड्रन वर गेटिंग 50,000 rupees, 1 lakh rupees. Was Protsahan raising that 1 lakh rupees for every child who was losing both parents? Or we said, no, we will ask the Delhi Sarkar or the XYZ center state Sarkar to say, this is the scheme, this is how you make the policy brief, roll it out, this is the, the limited time, otherwise these children will lose track of everything that's to come in future. And say, wo 1 lakh rupees for thousands of children you've unlocked, right? So without raising 5 CR or 7 CR, we got that entitlement to the survivors of abuse, neglect, whatever, right? So this the idea scaled of child protection or healing the children post abuse. The organization, we still had 2 people doing the same job.
So, sorry, I have to interject here. But yeah, also because I wanted to come in, because this is one of the fundamental things in strategy. If you look at the process that we talked about, we first talked about what is the change you want to achieve. It is not about what activities, it is not about who will do it, it is about for whom and what. You, as Sonal is saying, you are trying to scale the impact. It can be through partnership with the government, it can be through collaborative that Jayant is trying to form now, it can be through supporting other organizations as Antaraa is doing. So there can be multiple pathways to achieve the same change you want to have. And that's one of the fundamental questions of strategy. Okay, if this is the change you want to achieve for the community, is this the best path for you? Like, would it make sense for a Protsahan to have like state offices and like 50 people in every state, or no? or like, and what may work for Protsahan may not work for the thing that Magic Bus is trying to achieve. It's a very different problem. So, and I think this is where your facilitator, guide, mentor, consultant will come in. And this is a question that someone like me will ask. Is this the best way? Are you the best person to do this? Like if Magic Bus has to do something which they don't have experience in, like the question will be, why don't you partner? Is there someone who is like minded that you can partner with? So again, when we talk about scale, I think we should decouple the scale of impact with the budget of the organization. So like these are two very different statements, and I don't think any of the NGO can at least escape from saying, okay, if I have formed something which is something that is working, I need to share it with the larger ecosystem so that others can scale the impact. Like even if I want to stay grounded in my community, want to stay grassroots, I think, and that's my personal opinion, so please bear with me. I think it's a duty for an NGO to then at least share, make its IP open source, so that others can take it up and like do it in a different manner somewhere else. Ma'am, I know you have
I'll
a
quickly
question.
just add one little point. There's this
Quickly, Sonal.
absolutely. There's this powerful article by Stanford Social Innovation Review on what's your end game. Just read that up, look that up, and read it up. You'll find your answers.
Yes.
When we want to create vertical impact and we want to create sustained impact by building community leaders from I'm curious about what is a good way to build longevity with that? Because how do we create sustained motivation, upskilling, and a growth trajectory? And is that even the responsibility of the non-profit to do that? And how do we do it? So yeah,
So I'll time box the answers for 1 minute per person now.
Done. Sounds good. Thank you for that interesting question. So I think there are two or three ways of thinking about this. One way, I think you asked a very important question: is that the responsibility of the organization, but also conversely, is that the responsibility of the person? I feel like there are a few ways of thinking about this. Just one thing that I want to point out is that how do we design any sort of community based change and community based input in such a way that it meets multiple incentives for the person who is undertaking it. It might be, let's say, for example, it might be a social incentive. It might be some sort of recognition in the community. It might be an economic incentive if you're able to provide that. I think the skill really lies in being able to understand the needs of the individual who you are counting on to be a community champion, to understand that they will have a threshold. So we know, for example, in our organization, that certain volunteer groups that we work with will at the max last with us for 12 months, and that's perhaps in our perspective a gold standard. But if you've designed the program to be able to cultivate and to be able to engage these people, it should give them multiple benefits in their own day-to-day lives, and b, it should also be designed in such a manner that that itself becomes replicable. So two parts to that question. But so
uh, like a lot of time strategic planning when it's discussed in like stages like this may seem like a very easy exercise, and I wanted to just move to the next point of the what are the challenges, uncertainties, dilemmas that you actually face. Like it's not a linear process, but what is a practical issue that you face? And Jen, maybe again start with you and request to keep it for 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I think I've already spoken about it, so I don't really have too much to add. See, it depends on the phase of the organization that you are. I told you that, my biggest challenge today, if you ask me, is the dearth of talent in the sector. We need 200 odd people, 200, 250 every month. That's not there. The other thing that we are trying to do is we are trying to build a ecosystem, right? Now, see, I think, the role of a organization or a CEO is very clearly aligning the dots and seeing that, how with minimum effort can you get the maximum possible result and real result when I say that. And I'll give you an example. See, you could be doing 100 things, and still not being strategic or still not being able to achieve your outcomes. But you could do three things and maybe meet all your objectives. And that is where the CEO comes in, where he's thinking of, how can he do those, three or four things and make that. I'll give you a very simple example. See, today, one of the biggest problems that the country has is jobs and female labor force participation. We talk about a $30 trillion economy, right? But we will not get there if we don't have 70% female workforce participation. $14 trillion comes from there. Now, India's female workforce participation is around 30-35%. We are probably lower than Saudi Arabia. We are lower than Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, which are our neighbors. So there is a lot of work which needs to be done. Now, what people start doing, they start working at the last mile. You won't get the girls drop off much earlier. They drop off at pre-puberty, puberty ages, that is in the senior primary. You need to start working over there to create that pipeline. So what we did was, see, we work with the adolescent. We don't work at the primary because we feel 99% enrollment ho gaya. To a great extent, learning levels ka issue hai, chhod do. So we start working at the pre-puberty ages. And we've scaled that program. This year we are 30 lakhs, next year will be 80 lakhs. And we're doing state-wise saturation projects. We are getting into all school education systems. So we're building sustainability also. Or दूसरा, we are the largest player on the livelihood side, urban livelihood. So what we are saying is, can we actually, try the dots and make this, a collaborative where we can get anchor funders, get, other partners, get thought leaders into this whole collaborative. Now what we are doing is, you are aligning all your efforts around one objective, but you're meeting all your organizational objectives, you're meeting the country's objective. So समाज सरकार बाजार जो बोलते हैं, आप तीनों का align कर लिया आपने, एक चीज करके. So that's what I call strategy.
So, any challenges that you would want to add, Sonal, Antara, that you faced?
I think, and I'll simple understanding is that strategy जब आप बनाने बैठते हैं संस्था की या अपने काम की, it is not about just strategy is very different from going deep into operational efficiency, right? So the balance scorecard और वो कुछ जो management tools हैं important भी हैं, but they're not the strategy is really going deeper into. If there's one thing that I think would define strategy for me is getting your theory of change right. People think that it's बार बार सेम चीज़ बोली जाती है, बहुत इंटेलेक्चुअलाइजेशन है, नहीं बहुत ज़रूरी है. If you don't get your TOC right, you wouldn't know. आप again, like for the corollary of a football field, you're throwing the ball, it's going somewhere but it's not hitting the goal, but you're still very happy and tired at the end of the day. So that does not add to anything.
I think one of the key things is, as we mentioned, there are planning cycles. So I think one of the key things is that for individuals who have come in after that planning cycle has commenced, say that you're in year 1.5, and there is a new person who's joined your team, I think it's very important to bring them on board with the entire thought process that led to that particular decision and that particular outcome as well. That's one of the challenges of scaling strategy as we go ahead also.
Yeah. Thanks, Antara. And moving to the next slide. Okay, like maybe we can skip the poll. So these are some of the learnings that we had in terms of the challenges. What Sonal was saying, the TOC is very important, but some of the pitfalls that we have seen on what can make a strategy ineffective include some of these things, like being vague, being overly ambitious without having a sense of what is feasible, what's not feasible, making something so complex that it becomes difficult for other stakeholders to understand. So you know what you want to do, but others just feel like you're doing too many things and they don't know how all of this will fit in. So these are some of the challenges that we have seen organizations can face when they're defining their theory of change. Moving to the next one, then, like again, clean the air filter will do that. Sorry. So I just wanted to start here, Antara, with you and maybe ask the second question to you, which is, what role does data play in a strategy development and how does one integrate this in the process?
Right. Thank you so much for that question, Shashank. I think, honestly, data can be a very misrepresented word. So I'll just break down what my understanding of data really is. Data is something which, if I was ever called upon to present data or to share data, I would always be a little bit taken aback. But I think the fundamental of data is how are we listening and are we all listening to the same thing? That's basically it. You can collect data in different forms, be it quantitative information. You can collect it in terms of case stories from the field. You can collect different kinds of data in an organization and team. But essentially, like we said, the strategy is the reflection of what your communities are saying. And if the strategy is the reflection of what the communities are saying, how do we listen carefully to what's being said? And how do we all, across different verticals, across different streams, actually do that? And there I think data is really helpful. So at Civis, what we thought of was using data in a few different ways. One was just quantitative information, but the second was more around case, essentially personas, looking very closely at what stories we're hearing from the ground and quantifying it or codifying it in such a manner that others are able to come up to speed, or others are able to also engage and understand what and how that particular insight has influenced our strategy. So very like quickly, essentially, it's just about listening and making sure that we're, as a team, all listening to the same thing.
One line to that. See, data is the bedrock of all evidence and decision making. Very, very critical. And if you cannot measure it, you cannot track it very clearly. And as NGOs, I think we need to, I think this is one area that we really need to learn.
And sorry, Antara, just to add to what Jayant has said, and you also pointed out, when we are talking about data here, it's not necessarily just quantitative data, but when we are talking about qualitative data, when we are talking about anecdotes or stories, it should not become one-off things. Like having a process to just capture that it's a consistent impact that is being created. It's not a exception that is being tracked by the system and just some stories getting surface. So I think, Jayant, what you mentioned when you talk about it's important, I assume that you're talking about both the quantitative aspect of data as well as like qualitative, but in a very systematic and process oriented manner. So, yeah, I think moving to the next question, I think Sonal, I would want you to maybe talk about how does like this journey of what you said, founder to a CEO journey. So, what does strategic planning means for the personal journey of the NGO leaders, and what does it mean for grassroots NGOs, especially?
I think there is founders are led by passion, and rightly so, right? They want to see something work. There's a pain point that they want to do something about. पैशन से जब आप अब पैशन में 2 4 6 लोग आपके साथ जुड़ जाएंगे, बट एक दिन आएगा कि आपको कॉम्पनसेशन तय करनी है ना. दिस इज़ फॉर एनी स्टार्टअप, वाई जस्ट नॉन प्रॉफिट, है ना. दैट अंडरस्टैंडिंग फ्रॉम अ पैशन ड्रिवन फाउंडर टू अ प्रोसेस ड्रिवन CEO was a very intentional, strategic ask we made to ourselves. There were questions that, should I just, take a back seat to the board and, get another CEO and so on and so forth. In the next 5 years, 10 years, this is where we want to see, the country talking about abuse of children and, the way it should be spoken about. Kya wo main kar sakti? A lot of questions. And trust me, gender plays a huge role in this aspect because men may not, most men, I'm not saying all as a generalization, women, we tend to be so apologetic as leaders. When we have a seat on the table, we are like, oh, the power, the privilege, let's put some. I think I've come to that stage from a founder to a CEO. It's taken 14 and a half years for me. I started at 23 when you don't know much. But I think it's come to that space where you're asking questions about, like, literally every, like Jayant said, rightly so, in your CEO hat, you're only connecting the dots. If you're not able to do that right, you would have failed your organization or your mission. Your task is not to be on the ground every other day. If you're I would say for a grassroots nonprofit, if I am seen on the ground every other day, that means I've made an organization which is very founder syndrome led. वो सही गलत again के पैमाने से दूर, प्रोत्साहन का ideal way of running an organization नहीं है, a very feminist rights based way of running an organization नहीं है. मुझे लगता है अब मेरे social workers हैं and 40, 50, 60, they will do a job 100 times better than me, and that's why they're doing the job. I should be able to do my job as a fundraiser or XYZ. So asking that question every day to yourself, are you process driven? Are you creating systems chota chota, introducing a keka or a great HR or whatever to automate your HR? And it takes time. 2 crore का संस्था नहीं कर सकता ये. It takes time for your funder to also come in and say, I'm going to give you a 20% or a 10% little this thing in the major entire grant just for capacity building. I'm going to give you some money for just communication strengthening, right? One of the process pieces for us, and I'll close with that, when we were asking our questions in terms of the leadership, not just me, but another 3, 4 other top leadership in the organization, we were asking ourselves, where are we failing most horribly? And if we are for more than 5 months or 6 months and we're not able to figure out, let's try and delegate that out. Because clearly we are not accountability. NGOs को लगता है अक्सर, और हमने भी वो गलती करी as a system, कि there is joy and trust and joy and trust. What Jayant was also saying, right? And then ek din systems come in for accountability, for processes, and as they must, as they should. It should not, this is one part of the story, right? Which will only make your efficiencies and your strategy get to that whatever mission that you want to achieve faster, better, lesser cost, all of that. But then there's this other iska balance is what is most important. The other piece is, how many of us understand that log frames were introduced by the US Army during the Vietnam War as a method of framework or management tools, that the way NGOs now abide by all log frames of everything, हम सब कुछ input activities पे आके रुक जाते हैं. हमने इतना activity कर लिया, इतना input कर लिया. Okay, वो army भी track कर रही थी. It was a tool of oppression also, right? But beyond that, making it too leftist, the reality being, how many of us in our strategy actually stick to the outcomes piece? Because we are not doing that enough as non-profits also, smaller, bigger, whatever.
Thanks, Sonal, and huge question for the sector in general. But as a segue for the next section, Jayant, what I wanted to ask was that you talked about the growth of Magic Purse and how from consolidation you have moved to the growth phase. But like raising resources for this fundraising, how did you go about supporting your strategy with the right fundraising?
See, again, I think you have to be honest. You have to be really truthful. So the first 2 years that I joined Magic Bus, I told you programs ki kya halat thi. I did not go to any new funder at all. I just tried to retain whatever was there. Once I was sure about our evidence and our outcomes, then only I started going to the funders, and we started, putting a whole strategy together. So we were very, very CSR funder-led initial days. Then, and also it was, the CSR was led by one person, and I'm sure most of you in this room will know who it was, right? So it was led. Then we started building a complete chain, a structure of organization where, we started building some, I would say, risk mitigation into the whole thing, into the whole CSR, that, it just can't be residing on one person or one personality per se. And we've got, now 3 directors in CSR. We've got a 35 people team. We started opening other streams of revenues because we had ambitions. And there is a case study which is actually a Bridgespan case study only, I think, which says that, any NGO will have 1 or at the most 2 streams of funding, one major, one. But we thought that we were very ambitious and we will actually go against it. So we actually went against it. I don't know whether we still proven that or not, but we have 5 streams of funding actually, if you ask for Magic Bus. CSR. Second is institutional. That's really picked up for us now. Because, see, I believe if you do good work, money starts following you. And I'll just come to that a little later. Then we have retail, which is face-to-face. And then we have digital. Then we have HNIs and international. So 5 streams of revenues, out of which 3 are doing well. 2 we still need to work on. Now, so first is, your programmatic funding. When you're even looking at so you have to, what you're doing, we were trying to do was we're trying to build a diversified funding portfolio. So that risk mitigation, you just can't. Tomorrow government changes some rule or something else happens, a sector, you're not left high and dry. So that's the reason why we have so many different. Second is our ambition. Our ambition is really, really huge. So we should be able to kind of grow as per our ambition. Last year, we raised a decent chunk of money, which is probably, like maybe the top 20 NGOs are there. We raised that amount of money as new funding for ourselves last year, right? So we have, our ambition is that, if you have to do this FLFPR, obviously, you'll require 700, 800,000 crores a year. So we have to get there. We should be able to kind of, पाँव उतना ही फैलाओ जितनी चादर होती है. I don't know if I've got that idiom right, but that is what we are trying to do. The second thing is that, see, getting programmatic funding is now not a problem. I'm saying it does come, but it's your vision. Are funders willing to fund that? And that is, today we are at the stage where funders are. There's a platform called FutureX, very strategic platform, which is talking about future of skilling. So we've already got 60, 70 crores, from some of the people sitting in this room are also, funders for us. So people have started funding a vision of, our vision of how we are going to solve that problem. So which is really a good space. And it gives you great satisfaction that, you are trying to do something which is really at scale. And again, I'm saying scale is individual organizations' decision. I think we've spoken enough about that.
Thanks, and we'll quickly wrap this up. And what I wanted to do was move into the next segment, which is, okay, how do you translate the high level plan that a strategy is into something that becomes activities that can be understood and undertaken on a day-to-day basis? So this is something that we are all aware. We have talked about it, that we are living in a world where the challenges are huge, the resources are limited. So we cannot do everything that we want to, but at the same time we don't have to do everything that we want to. There can be other players that we can partner with. So that's one way of solving for this issue. The other is also, this resource constraint also makes us take a hard look on which are the most high ROI. In the morning session they were talking about social return on investment. So which are the most high ROI activities that you can undertake for the mission that you're working for? So I think that is something to be kept in mind. And strategy is about achieving that fit of given resources, my aspirations, and the kind of activities that I will undertake. Next slide, please. And when we talk about resources, again, this is something that is important. We need to look at it beyond fundraising. Sometimes a lot of conversation that we have with our partner NGOs is about, okay, how do I raise money for this? But as Jen said, sometimes money will flow if you have all the ingredients in place. But what are those ingredients? So it's about the organization structure and capability. Have you created the right capabilities? Do you need to hire, or do you need to partner or outsource some of these? What is the right structure which will drive accountability beyond the CEO or the leaders like losing sleep? Are there others who will be accountable for doing their own work well, which contributes to the strategy? Fundraising remains an important part, so it's important to also think about what will be the fundraising strategy. Jayant talked about 5 different segments of funders, and while Bridgespan has a report which talks about focus on some of the segments, I would say please take a look at that report, that it is written in the context of US. We had looked at a funder in US, a donor advised fund manager. They were giving some $4 billion in a year, out of which 60% was going to 7 districts of California. That's the kind of resource environment people can be in US, which is not true in India. The regulatory environment is very different in India. CSR can fund something, cannot fund something. A foundation can fund something, cannot fund something. A global foundation can fund something, cannot fund something else. So you need to keep all of that in mind when you talk about your fundraising strategy. There is this whole element of the processes. How will different functions come together? How will different programs come together? How will you collaborate? How will decisions be made? And then finally, how will you measure whether you're moving in the right direction or not? How will you ensure that in case something is going wrong, it is highlighted well in time for corrective action to be taken? A strategy cannot give you 100% sure path of achieving you want to achieve. So what happens is, as Jayant was saying, you will incubate, you will pilot, you will test out certain things that you may have thought that you will be able to do. And then uh, if it works, fine, you scale it up. If it doesn't, you need to figure out why it isn't working. So those are some of the things that you have to take. And the next slide talks about just like an example of an NGO which had a 5-year goal. They translated that into a 2-year impact goals. So for example, they wanted to expand their work to 7 districts. And what was their 2-year goal? They understood that once an MOU is signed, it will be easier to expand. And probably the first MOU will take more time. Signing an MOU with the district administration will take more time. So their 2-year goal was just to sign 2 MOUs. And they made this clear when they translated this strategy in this manner. They were also making it clear to the funders that were backing this strategy, so that the funder was not saying, okay, you said 7 districts, where are those 7 districts in year 2? Or like when they were talking about reduction of IMR, infant mortality rate, in these 7 districts by 70%, they said, okay, what is it that we will achieve? So translating that, and then again going back to looking at what kind of activities that are needed to be done in terms of organization structure, partnerships, fundraising, and all the other things that come into play. Next slide. Sorry, I'm just rushing through these slides so that we can have more time for some Q&A in the end. So I hope that's okay. So basically, this is the last part of the strategic planning process, which is about how will you monitor? How will you identify what are the risks associated? What happens is, in any strategic planning exercise, there will be some external dependencies. There will be some assumptions that you will be making in terms of how the policy environment will work, or how other players will focus on the same issue that you are looking at. And there will be some assumptions you will be making about the internal organization. So all of these uncertainties will bring in an element of risk. So you need to think about the risk mitigation plan for some of the like key risks that you have identified. And then like figuring out how does this planning translate into decision making, whether it's about continuation of the program, whether it is about growing a certain program because it is achieving better results than expected, or discontinuing the program or strengthening it, refining it, all of those decision making. A strategic plan can play an important role in this. And the next slide is again an example of an organization which translated the strategy into what we called priority on a page for the fundraising function. So the organizational objective was that annual funding achievement needs to increase by 20% year on year. How do you go about doing it? So that led to a priority for the fundraising function. The priority became, okay, I need to have a very thought through fundraising strategy if this is the kind of growth I want to achieve. Led to who will be the owner of this action, what are the activities that will be undertaken, what are the challenges that you expect to face, and how will you overcome those challenges, or if those are challenges that you cannot overcome, what is the alternate path of action that you will take. And then again identifying what will be the early signals to tell you whether it's working or not working. So translating strategy into, let's say, if you have a program head, what does it mean for the program head? What does it mean for your finance function? What does it mean for your fundraising function? What does it mean for your MLE function? That's also an important part of thinking through and making strategy actually work for your organization, rather than just paying the salaries of a high paid consultant. So with that, I'll stop here and we'll take few more questions if that's okay. Yes, sir. Please.
While thinking about strategy, should we think about an end point or a withdrawal that, okay, at what time the organization would withdraw it, and so planning about where you are going to stop?
Yeah. And I'm sure there will be some NGO leaders who will be far more equipped to answer that question. But I think, and please feel free to come in, but like in my experience, what I have seen happen is a transition plan is put in place of how a low involvement facilitative work can be done, even for a service delivery organization. But and Rashmi, please feel free to come in on this point, because this is something that I think Harsha Trust really focuses on. But yes, it can be, but in a 3 to 5 year time frame, are we are we being realistic? And apologies to all the funders, or are we pandering to what the funders want to see, that in 5 years time the NGO has done everything that needed to be done and just withdraws, and the community is all ready to take it up on their own? So I think in a 3 to 5 year time frame, I would find it unrealistic, but depends from case to case. Rashmi, you want to come in on this? Sorry.
Yeah, I think what I would echo with what Shashank said. Um, so Harsha Trust works in Orissa, and there are some blocks where we have been working in those blocks for the last, say, close to 15 years. I would say that the organization, initially we thought that we will withdraw from some blocks, and each time the board asks a question to us that why still in a particular block that you're still continuing. And the question is that the needs of the community and the aspirations of the community is also evolving. And our involvement, what Shashank said, that the kind of involvement, the intensity of the involvement, I think that has changed over the time. And I think the importance is to respond to the changing needs and the aspirations in the community. So I would agree with what Shashank said, that within the 3 to 5 years, it's absolutely unrealistic.
Sorry, I'll direct this also to Jayant if you want to win. Nothing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions, sir? You had a question.
I have a question.
Sorry. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether it's a question or not, but listening to all the panelists, what I felt that the strategic planning, is it based on the current state or really looking at the future? Like if it's strategic planning is going to happen for the next 3 to 5 years, are we really looking at what would be the priorities of the community next 5 years? What would be the stakeholders envisage for themselves in next 5 years? Be it donors, be it strategic bodies, be it market, be it financial institutions, because these are important ecosystem players that we need to consider while doing the stakeholder planning. Somewhere I didn't get this sense from the discussions. What I understood is largely talking about the current state. But do you really think that is it more important to look at the future priorities or future needs and based
Sorry.
on
Can you go to the
those,
intended impact slide?
strategic planning for those people?
Yeah. So see, any strategy has to be contextual, and I tried to clarify that because see, your current state definitely has to be in mind, but it's also about the future, right? So you have to look at that goal. So it has to marry both. Because if I do strategy based on just the future goals and I don't know where I am today, then it's not strategy. Then it's wishful thinking.
And sorry, I rushed through some of these slides, but I think it's an important point. I think it is about, like, in a way, you're trying to crystal gaze into how the environment in the ecosystem will evolve as well. So what Srikanth was talking about, like when we worked with Janagra, there were a lot of conversations with funders to get their outlook on what do they think, how the urban governance landscape is going to evolve. No one has an answer, but collectively a broad picture can be formed in that manner. So the idea is to look at it in a 5 year time horizon, where you are, as Jayan said. Who you are and what you are is as important for strategy as where you want to be. Because and that's the practicality and the feasibility part of strategy that comes into play. But where will you operate is not in a vacuum. There are other players, there will be other NGOs who may be doing something interesting. Some maybe another NGO may alleviate the need that you may be thinking is going to be very important. So having that kind of landscape assessment, saying who else is doing what can we learn from others, is it really an going to be an unfulfilled need or a aspiration for the community is important. Okay, I'll take one last question probably so that people can have time for lunch. Yes, ma'am.
When we talk about strategic planning for an organization, is there an ideal who or who really comprises of the strategic team? When I mean, I'm talking because I work with an organization that does strategies also. We're like a strategy consulting firm. So when in terms of audience analysis, who am I catering to? Who do I involve in this whole strategic decision making? Is there an ideal composition of this whole strategic team?
So is it a question for the panelist or is it a trade secret that you're asking me?
So certainly the leadership, for sure. And leadership की definition क्या है, right? It could be proximate leaders, the ones who are closest to solving the problem, as well as the leadership of the organization, including by all means the board, have to be a part of owning the strategic exercise. But in addition to that, I think also a few funders. Like when we did our strategic exercise, we were very sure to even indulge a potential funder जिसने आज तक हमें fund नहीं किया, but हमें लगता है कि if we go, you know, if this is a vision, mission, whatever we want to achieve, this person or this set of team could be very important in making that come alive. So we even indulge them in the process. But I think leadership, including the board for sure, and then again leadership, however the organization may define, like Jayant said, contextual. So proximate leaders for us, for example, was it easy? Oh, certainly not. One of the most we failed, like I just said, right? But we probably know which parts of the trajectory to now next invite them in, but certainly having an opinion that inspires the team, because your strategy is for your team. I can't reinstate that enough.
For me, strategies, you have to keep it simple and you have to be a little lazy, because then you find the most easiest solutions. So be smart, be also lazy, so that you find the simplest solutions, because it shouldn't be complicated, it should be easy to implement.
Sorry. I'll give out the trade secret anyway. So basically, when we are doing a strategy as Bitspan, we would look at it in different manner. So there are people who are decision makers. There are people whose input is vital for strategy to be useful. And there are people who need to be aligned to the strategy for the organization to be actually able to implement the strategy. And then, like, sometimes it's a formal role. In one of the clients that I am right now working with, I am engaging with the cousin of the wealth creator who has no official role, because that person has the ear of the principal of the client. So if that person is aligned with what we are working on or what we are proposing for the client, then the chances of that becoming a final strategy is higher. So I think, like, doing that kind of stakeholder mapping in the beginning, and that's why we said that's one of the first process steps that you need to take in terms of whose inputs you want, whose alignment and agreement you would want. So if you're working closely with the government, and you haven't taken in inputs from different government stakeholders, then it can be a very risky approach. But yeah, one last question and then we'll move. So yes.
So I can speak without.
Yes.
I read it somewhere that India disappoints pessimists and optimists in equal measures. As I'm attending this conference, I'm very, very happy to see such young people heading such brilliant organizations. And also, just to give an idea, just to see your point that you do innovative work and then you take it to the government and somebody else to take, it's not for the NGOs to scale up. I've been working in the education sector for now 10, 15 years, in the livelihood sector for 30 years. Just taking an example of livelihood education. Education new policy came 25 years back. So many NGOs are working with so many innovative models. And if you look at ASAR report, which keeps on every year talking about the status of education of underprivileged children, I will cite again. 80% of children, 78% of children of 8th class cannot read to basically.
Sir,
So my
yes.
point is strategic in the sense here. So when you look for a small organization which wants to do innovative work and then influence government, what do? You realize this kind so with so much of effort, the results is not coming. You ultimately want your effort to reach to a larger mass. And if that doesn't happen, what do? So what should be your strategy as an organization? You want to work small, and so many people are trying all this. So I think we have to be humble in this approach and we have to
No,
take this into stride.
so Sonal, this may talk to the communication being an important
No
part.
pressure, right? Yeah, answering for the government, sure. I think I wish, sir, it was an ideal world. Um, I it's like I wanted to give a very Mahabharat Ramayana type of example, but I shall refrain. It's also this this thing that how what and hence my point back to the Stanford article on what's your end game, because as non-profits बड़े या छोटे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन स्केल की परिभाषा से ये कॉन्वर्सेशन बहुत परे है ना. हाउ डू वी डिफाइन नीड्स बेस्ड, एक छोटा सा एग्जांपल, नीड्स बेस्ड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन वर्सेस राइट्स बेस्ड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. सो अ नीड्स बेस्ड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन वुड जो सैनिटरी मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन पे काम कर रही है, लेट्स से दे वुड प्रॉब्ली गेट लाखों लाख सैनिटरी पैड्स एंड डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड इन schools and villages in the menstrual health week in May, on May 28th or whatever. But a rights based organization will probably talk about the period education, the period poverty, will sit on the government tables and say, hey, ask the government the tough questions, and will probably need 1/100th the budget than the need based organization. किसी का काम ज़्यादा, need based organization disasters के time, rights based लंबा काम है. डिजास्टर के टाइम दिस संस्था इज द इसका स्केल होना चाहिए. सो देर इज नो ईदर और, इट्स एन एंड. दैट्स द फर्स्ट पार्ट ऑफ दिस, जो हम स्ट्रैटेजी में भी अपने आप पूछते हैं. जैसे प्रोत्साहन के लिए हमने सिंपल 2x2 मैट्रिक्स बनाया और हमने अपने आप से पूछा कि पहला एक, अगर मैं 2x2 को, आई मेक इट क्विक, आई नो द ब्रिज स्पैनी पार्ट ऑफ इट विल अल्योर टू दिस एनालॉजी. द 2x2, the first, if I break it into 1x3, 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 right? The first 1/3 of this 2x2 matrix was probably the direct work that we were doing with the survivors of abuse, right? Severe abuse, जिसमें कोई सरकार, और वो हमेशा होगा कि no amount of system will be able to reach that child. And how we ended up defining it as, we will not be working with the mainstream children because they've already entered schools and so on and so forth, and they have at least some basic access to services. We'll be working with children who are not even on the margins but have fallen off the margins. That is my audience, for the lack of a better way, as प्रोत्साहन. जिसको कोई नहीं देख रहा है, प्रोत्साहन will look at it. So that was the direct work. एक सेंटर, दो सेंटर, 15 slums से 100 slums, so on and so forth, right? Then we, in the strategy, first part of the exercise, like हम कितने सेंटर खोल लेंगे, क्या सारे सेंटर खोलना प्रोत्साहन का काम है. एंड एक पॉइंट के बाद आपको वो यू स्टार्ट टू क्वेश्चन योर सेल्फ व्हेन यू बिगिनिंग टू बिकम द इंटेलिजेंस ऑफ द सिस्टम, ऑल्सो इंटेलिजेंस ऑफ द ecosystem itself, right? So now when we are sitting with the UN or the World Bank or the governments, the state governments, we are bringing that insight of what a survivor needs, looking at the childcare institutions ka social audits, right? It's a very different sort of a conversation. So the first 1/3 will almost always be innovation or R&D or you working directly. So this is the direct work, the doing. The enabling starts for the next 2/3, right? In the second part of the breakup, if I say, this is where you talk about replication. This is where you talk about enablement. So if for the survivors, we have, let's say, made hundreds of, a few of the girls, survivor girls, we've got them great jobs, we've trained them, whatever. We say, okay, we are doing job melas now. So we get 20 organizations and 20 McDonald's and Burger Kings and whatever, bring them together on a platform and say, because we have made industry partnerships for our girls here in the first part of the quadrant or whatever it is. And in the second, we say, let's just do a job mela because we have partnerships with the NGOs. We have great partnerships with the industry now. Let's open it up. I promise to close it.
People are getting hangry. No. So
And
sorry,
the
sir,
last
like, yeah.
core piece, the policy advocacy. Because if you've done this and this right, you will be able to get the policy of the country right. But it's no easy process.
No, and
Just one line. I'm saying the strategy for a development organization has to be about impact on community.
yes,
It is not about what the process organization has followed.
no,
About the strategy making.
no, but no.
Saying what is the impact?
No. So let me just answer your question in a different manner. Let's say if I was working as a consultant with your organization, I would have asked, okay, in the last 5 years, what was it that you were trying to achieve? What were the activities that you did to achieve what you wanted to achieve? So, as you're pointing out, like us as a small organization, no, it's as important a part of a strategy, because unless and until a consultant understands that. So in this case, for example, if your theory of change is that I will do something innovative, demonstrate the result, and then it needs to be picked up by others. So the kind of questions I would ask is, what are you doing which is innovative? Is that definition of innovation also accepted by others? Do others accept that it is innovative? Do others understand the impact that you are creating, and what are you doing to make others understand that impact? So as much as your program is important, and that's what I was saying, Sonal, I think in this theory of change, while demonstration through a pilot is important, like translating that into something which can be easily adopted by others, as well as ensuring that others understand why that pilot is so unique and so innovative and so beautiful, becomes as vital a part. So again, from a strategy perspective, if I was defining this as a theory of change, I would have probably put two-thirds of your resources on the second and third aspect of it. So only one-third goes into actually doing the program on the ground. Two-third capabilities need to be sharing it with the larger world. So I think that is one thing I would say when it comes to strategy, is like your aspiration define your theory of change. Your theory of change will define. Yeah, yeah. We can probably take it offline. Yeah.
Organizational review, periodic review, and strategic review should not be confused.
No, absolutely.
That's the
Yeah.
point I'm saying.
Yes. Fine.
A lot of points which are in series
Yes.
like periodic review, organizational review, getting overlapped with
Yeah.
strategic visioning and review. So that is
Sure. Okay. Get it, sir. Like, I would like to conclude by thanking our panelists and the audience, which sat through the 2 hour session and patiently heard all of us giving all kind of gyan. So, some useful, some not that useful, so it's okay. Uh, but thank you, Antaraa. Thanks, Sonal. Thank you, Jayant, for making time for us. And we are really grateful for your contributions.
Thank you so much. I just request the team to felicitate our panelists and also for a group photograph.